This is the Millennial Realtor podcast. Thanks for joining us. You had questions about buying, selling, and investing in real estate, and we are going to answer that. Today, I brought in Tony Mazeika of Mazeikateam, and we are going to talk about the most important part of the transaction as far as what's going on with selling a home. So you have all sorts of things that are going on as far as with the transaction, and there's a lot of liabilities that come up. There's a lot of hoops that come around, a lot of obstacles that come in and out of a real estate transaction, and Tony will be interviewed with me to discuss this in detail. So with that said, I have myself and Tony. So thanks for joining, Tony.
Thank you very much. Well, I think first of all, there seems to be possibly a misconception in terms of the purchase process and the purchase of a new home, of a home basically for occupancy by the buyers. What we're talking about is the process of pre-qualification and pre-approval. Very often people are inundated with samples of homes, photographs, media, videos of homes that look absolutely outstanding, and of course these are the things that cause people to really begin to think about and want to search for a home for their next step. But the problem here is that in many instances our buyers are not prepared for the purchase of that property, including the expectations of what is going to happen when they go through the process of making the offer. The number one issue here that we need to address is that all of us, you, us, buyers, we need to be prepared in advance for the purchase of a property. The most important thing is being approved for a property. And through that, what we need to do is to go through the lender of our choice. Usually it should be a direct lender that's able to put together a pre-approval package.
Sure.
And also to deal with the issues of affordability up front. Part of that, of course, is putting together a financial package of our credit, of our compensation, of all the issues and reserves that fall into that category, so that when we make an offer, we are totally prepared for the offer to be accepted by the listing agent.
Absolutely, but the seller, as far as looking at the best scenario possible. So now, and because you do a lot of listings, you've done over 800 transactions since 1986, and so the best financial position to be in on the level is cash, right?
It would be, but in most instances here we're talking about if you're going to be a first-time home buyer or even someone who owns a property to move it to the next level and purchase another property, we are dealing with the lending process. We're dealing with banks, and we are dealing with the ultimate decision that is made by the bank, not by anybody else, but the bank to fund the transaction.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, what we have to do is be prepared so that we're able to provide the best possible circumstances for our offer. If we are approved in advance when we make an offer on a property for it to be accepted.
Mm-hmm. So, okay, and then as far as the financing side of things, the listing side and the seller side, they want to see, they don't, which is better, the pre-approval or the pre-qualified, and what's the difference?
Well, there's a massive difference between pre-qualification and pre-approval. A pre-qualification generally is basically for a verbal conversation that someone would have with a lender, is stating certain aspects of the amount of cash that they would be able to use as a down payment plus their credit, but all this essentially is verbal. But ultimately the package of all the information that is necessary should really reach an underwriter even before you make an offer.
Mm-hmm.
And in many instances, some of the banks do not even offer the possibility to speak to an underwriter for you until a transaction is open. So that creates a lot of pressure and sensitivity on the buyer as well as on the seller in terms of the process, in terms of what's going to happen next.
Correct. So you want to make sure that the financial package is ready for the buyer to be accepted as far as in a multiple offer scenario. So that being said,
well, we don't want to make an offer on a property until we have what we really need to have in the process to get us a pre-approval, because pre-approvals with a follow-up of an appraisal is like cash. And most sellers through their agent like to see people that already have an approval process that's ready to go, as opposed to someone who's only pre-qualified. Once again, not all lenders provide pre-approvals in advance, and we need to work with those direct lenders that offer the possibility, so that our package, which is presented to them with all of our credit and cash reserves and compensation and all the other issues, are there for them to take a look at in advance before we go ahead and write an offer.
That's good. Okay, so I have the purchase agreement in front of me, and we'll be kind of going through kind of bits and details of that's concerned, and then obviously, still talking about the financial side of things. Proof of funds is the most important part of the transaction. Is that correct? Before an offer is made?
Oh, absolutely. Otherwise, the transaction is not truly a legal document until there is proof of funds put forward, so that the seller on the opposite side knows that you truly do have the funds to be able to complete this transaction, the purchase. And the process itself doesn't have to be as complicated as it seems to be if we do our homework up front.
Good. Okay. So, and then I guess, better scenarios for you accepting offers on the list side. 80-20, FHA, conventional, what's kind of, the sweet spot for sellers?
Well, if I were talking to sellers, obviously we would be consulting them with them, basically to give them the best possible situation in terms of what will absolutely work out to be the best transaction that will be accepted. And from the standpoint of the seller, obviously cash would always be number one, and number two would be a firm down payment, which would be put together with the package of a pre-approval to show that the transaction can be completed. And once again, though, I go back to the fact that buyers should be prepared in advance before ultimately making an offer on a property, so that they have all of their I's dotted and the T's crossed.
Ducks in a row.
Everything in a row, and make it very comfortable for the seller through their agent to accept a good offer.
That's good. Okay, so kind of using this as a guideline as well. Now, coming from the standpoint of making sure that there's no liabilities with the transaction, title. How do you manage working with any clouds on title during the transaction?
Well, clouds on title only come up basically if a seller has some sort of an issue insofar as the ownership of the property. But going back to the buyer here, in order to extend the best possible conditions for a buyer, of course, the way our transactions are put together here in California, they have a 17-day window to be able to do inspections on a property, to be able to have all kinds of documents prepared to the buyers, including title information, all of which for them they're able to take a look at and review, plus also the disclosures that are put forward and prepared in advance by the seller to show the condition of the property. So up to 17 days is the period of time that you as a buyer have an opportunity to go through and investigate everything, including the actual physical inspection of the property, and then be convinced that the property will have no issues so far as you're concerned in its proper condition of the property.
Great, and then disclosures on the seller standpoint of the property, that should be done well in advance, correct?
Well, we would hope that the seller will have all the necessary documentation in advance, just like the buyer has to have all the documentation in advance so far as financials are concerned and credit. The seller needs to have all the necessary required documentation on the condition of the property, including those things which are legally required, for instance, by the state of California. So all of this should be done in advance so that both sides basically have access to the information that's necessary to make the transaction move ahead.
Okay. Let me see here. I guess HOA, you in your areas that you've dealt with, you haven't had a lot of HOA holdups because of the areas that you work on. But talking about purchasing a condo or a townhome with an HOA.
Well, if you're talking about the purchase of a condominium or a townhome, there are homeowner associations attached to those properties. And these are mandatory homeowner associations because those associations are responsible for the overall condition of the properties and the property and the green belts and the parks surrounding that property. And those items basically are presented to the buyer so that they understand what the cost is and what they include. And in some instances, those homeowner associations may also include things like a lake membership or pool memberships in certain areas as well. So all of that is basically prepared in advance by the seller so that the buyer has an opportunity to investigate that during the process of the 17-day period of contingency.
That's a good. Okay. So what else do we have a conversation about? Okay, so during that inspection period of time, as far as liabilities for sellers are concerned, how do you manage any type of plumbing issues, electrical issues, anything of that nature?
Well, we always recommend the fact that a buyer should always have and choose a responsible inspection company to go through the property in an organized fashion, looking at all the systems of the home, including plumbing and electricity, among other things. So goes without saying that this is an absolutely essential part for someone who's buying a home to do all of this and do it properly through somebody that is experienced to know all about the conditions of this property when they are there and have the experience overall as professionals.
But not Uncle Joe to do the property inspection.
Well, family and others can come along basically to take a look at properties, but we always recommend as someone who is someone who has had years of experience should inspect the property properly so that you would understand the overall condition of the property based on its age and its location.
That's good. That's very good. Okay. And then also simultaneously, because while the disclosures are going on, while the home property inspection is coming around, you also have a period of an appraiser coming in to appraise the value of the property. Can you touch about that?
Well, this is connected with the actual lender themselves, and obviously an appraisal must be done before the lender will issue and indicate that the property is worth the value. So it's very important that an appraiser be done, and it has to be done and will be done on all properties where, especially if you have a loan, you need an appraiser, and the bank will choose the appraiser for you.
That's good. Okay. And then I guess just managing through the process to the end to make sure that everything is moving smoothly as far as holdbacks or anything else of that nature.
Right. But I think that the most important thing is that there is a preparation period for the buyers, and certainly for the owners who are selling the property, to have a professional consultant realtor there to take care of all these things in advance, so to make the process a smooth process. Sometimes there are things that we only find later on in the process that we didn't know about before, but the most important thing is that there are many things that we can schedule in advance to make the actual transaction a somewhat pleasant opportunity to get things done in a timely fashion. But once again, the most important thing for a buyer is to have the consultation and support of an experienced realtor there to consult, to make the proper preparations in advance to help you and your family put your package together so that you're ready to go and be one of the first people to be recognized in making an offer on a property.
It's very good. Okay. Getting back to another question on, you getting the offer as far as place is concerned. I know that your experience is that you get multiple offers on properties that you represent many times. What's your overall process and as far as when you receive the offer, you get that, and what do you do to vet the lender and vet the agent? What do you do in that?
Well, now we're talking about our responsibilities working with a seller with their property and being able to get the highest, best conditions for their sale of their home.
Mm-hmm.
And the things that are important there is, of course, is looking at an offer, at multiple offers if that comes in. And if you are getting multiple offers, that means that the value of your property is being pushed up because so many people are expressing an interest in this home and believe that it is an excellent price, and they're willing to go ahead and make an offer on the property with the highest best offer. But the important thing there is that the seller should always look for those conditions that will make it certain that the transaction will close. Of course, obviously, in many instances, if somebody is offering all cash, then obviously there are no conditions of lending that are important
Mm-hmm.
there. However, in many instances, though, the sellers would like to have someone, a family, or individuals basically purchasing this property, not an investor. Most of the all cash offers are coming from investor type people, and sometimes those purchases are done for a purpose of turning those properties into rental properties. So the important thing here is when you're working with a seller, you want to make sure that you understand what the conditions are and who the people are who are making the offers on this property. So very often, the sellers will want to probably see people who they believe would fit best in this home and the neighborhood, and especially if there are families, they would like to give them a little bit of a leg up
Mm-hmm.
in the process. But we are looking at, of course, the conditions of the finance, which would guarantee that the transaction will close. But still, cash is number one. Number two is a pre-approval or a process that would show that through the contacts being made with the borrower's lender to confirm that this property will close with that price and with all the conditions that are there.
So if you have two offers, one that's qualified and then a pre-qualified offer but with a higher offer, you're going to take the one with the lesser offer, right? Because of the qualifications of the buyer, even though if it's just a pre-qualified with a higher.
But still, this is still a decision of the seller in terms of who will purchase the property properly. But the point is to take a look at the best possible conditions to the close of escrow, and of course the conditions on the person that is getting a loan from a bank. Looking at all the details of that process is very, very important for the seller to choose the right persons so that there is no failure in the process.
Good. Okay. So that's ways to protect sellers and buyers. And I guess, from your standpoint, with sellers, they have to disclose pretty much all conditions of the property.
Well, certainly all of this is done, of course. It's a legal responsibility of a seller that owns the property to reveal any and all aspects of the property. If there were some issues with the property in the past,
Mm-hmm.
those things would also be identified and taken care of, so that all these things are, of course, listed on disclosure forms that are filled out in advance. So we would anticipate that a seller would be absolutely honest in disclosing everything with the property.
Deaths on the property, leaks, plumbing issues, any
Well,
insurance
the
claims,
issue
stuff
of
like
death in the
that.
property would already in advance be announced in advance before and in the process of advertising the home. The home would be promoted probably through the multiple listing system, so all of those things would indicate a very important disclosure up front before people make an offer on a property about those types of conditions. And that's very, very important.
Good. Okay. That's all I have so far. Any other pointers that you would give out as far as during the transaction representing the buyer or the seller?
I think that the first very important thing here is for people that are purchasing their home, especially the first time, that they do everything possible to come up with the best realtor consultant that has experience to work with them to make this process easier. The point here is that very, very, very often things are done in a reverse fashion, or things are left out of the process. So in that process here, it's very important to get a pre-approval and then possibly even a further approval through the lending process, through direct lenders. By a direct lender, what I mean, usually these are organizations, these are banks on a regional basis or local basis that have the funds themselves to close the transaction. Other banks, the main, what I call the Wall Street banks, essentially funds are coming from out of state or coming from headquarters locations out of the state, and they have a myriad of different steps of process that the buyer has to go through, and it becomes more difficult for the buyer because it takes longer with these big banks to complete a complete approval.
Good. I think that's really important too. Knowing what you're getting into as far as with those low interest rates, that you may not get the property. A lot of times, working with a larger bank that has somebody all across the other side of the country.
Well, the larger banks have a huge, I would say, there's a huge level of bureaucracy. There are different levels and different people to be contacted in advance, and very often you will not get a pre-approval from a large, what we call Wall Street banks. The Chases and the Wells Fargos, these Bank of America types, basically, they will not give you a pre-approval that is absolutely important in this process, because they won't let you talk to the underwriter until after you open a transaction, whereas direct lenders already will give you the green light if your process and your package is presented to the underwriter of a direct lender. They will give you a result and an answer very, very quickly.
Good. Well, thanks for coming in. I appreciate you sharing your wisdom of over 30 years of experience in the real estate industry, and you've seen it all: the ups, the downs, the sideways markets, the short sales, the good times, the bad times, probate sales.
Well, it doesn't matter really, because the bottom line here is there is always a good time to purchase property for the right conditions. The markets may go up and down, but the point is that even when it's on a downtrend or at the bottom, there are great opportunities at that point, the same way as the stock market. But the point here is to be prepared at all times in advance with people that are experienced, that can help you through the process to make it a pleasant process.
Good. Thanks, Tony, for coming in, and I appreciate that. And everyone on the podcast, thank you for joining us. And there's more to come, so stay tuned for further episodes. And thanks for listening to the Millennial Realtor podcast.